Hey everyone, it's Bina 007 here with a review of two films. The first is Luca Guadagnino's Queer, and the second is We Live in Time. So let's start with Queer, which, oh my goodness, it's based on a novel by William S Burroughs, set in 1950s Mexico, and stars Daniel Craig playing very against type as an aging junkie who is obsessed with, falls in love with a much younger man, played by Drew Starkey. It's a very long film. It's well over 2 hours. I think it's 2 hours 20. And that is a long film for a film with very little plot and very little interiority. It proceeds as follows. Aging disheveled junkie hooks up with younger man who may or may not actually be queer. They travel to a tropical jungle to take ayahuasca together, have a super trippy experience, and then they part. Decades later, the older guy is apparently still in love with the boy. And that is basically it. And even that description overdoes the level of narrative propulsion, which is basically nil. We spend pretty much the whole first hour of this film just watching Daniel Craig in bar after bar, getting drunk on tequila or beer or smoking, and just hanging out and trying to attract the attention of this young boy. I never felt as though I had a handle on whether the character Lee was actually in love or just in lust until literally the final 5 minutes of the film, which were admittedly moving, but I was like, where was this for the preceding 2 hours, 15 minutes? And I didn't feel invested in the relationship or the intricacies or ambiguities of whether Lee was a trick or a love interest for Eugene. I think there's just a limit to how much you can watch Daniel Craig drink tequila in a linen suit, even though it is a very brave performance and it is very much against type as the sort of, hyper masculine James Bond. That said, I mean, there are a few redeeming features to this film, not enough to sustain the runtime, because Luca Guadagnino is a good filmmaker. So it looks incredibly handsome. The performances are good. The whole production design and recreation of 1950s Mexico is great. There is a wonderfully unexpected and bonkers and against type cameo from the British actress Leslie Manville, who is currently starring heartbreakingly in Apple TV's Disclaimer. I'd say it's worth the price of entry. It's kind of not, but it's still very good and very welcome when it arrives. I think Luca Guadagnino and his leads, Daniel Craig and Drew Starkey, are admirably brave in depicting gay sex. And I said before that, the final 5 minutes are genuinely moving. But boy, there is a lot of self indulgent, handsomely produced, but utterly dull chaff to wade through to get to the grain of this film. And I think people who came to Luca Guadagnino falling in love with his film Call Me By Your Name, that had a lot more plot and character development and emotional payoff, are going to be very confused by and put off by Queer. Queer has a running time of 135 minutes. It played Venice, Toronto, and London 2024. It goes on release in the USA on November 27th and in the UK on December 13th. Okay, let's now move on to We Live in Time, which is the absolute opposite of Queer insofar as it's very, very plain vanilla, heteronormative. It thinks it's being something more daring and contemporary, but it really isn't. From my perspective, We Live in Time is a sub Richard Curtis film. It's an attempt at a tragic comic romance. It's directed by John Crowley, who made Brooklyn, and written by Nick Payne, who wrote A Sense of an Ending. It's a film that is so mannered and meet cute and interior designed to within an inch of its life that I was just utterly alienated from it. I couldn't emotionally engage with these characters. I just bounced off their shiny plastic surfaces. And that's from a film that I think is attempting to be a deeply emotional weepy. It stars Andrew Garfield, last seen in The Eyes of Tammy Faye, who kind of gurns his way through the film as a nerdy and conventional guy called Tobias, oh yes, who is run over by the 2024 version of a manic pixie dream girl. And she is played by Florence Pugh, who we last saw in June Part 2. Pugh is apparently a German descended chef called Almut Brühl, And she's meant to be the opposite of Tobias. So where he's nerdy and conventional, she is cool, unconventional, very competitive, bisexual, hipster. But, this odd couple meet in this meet cute of a car crash. They fall in love. They kind of break up over whether to have children. And it's a very weird argument. And I think we're meant to sort of think that the Florence Pugh character is really in the right on this. But actually, I think Andrew Garfield's right. Isn't it better to have the awkward conversation up front? But anyway, they do get back together. Almut, the girl, gets cancer for the first time, decides that she does therefore want to have children. It's ovarian cancer, so it compromises her ability to have children. They have a kid. Almut gets cancer again, decides to compete in a cooking competition, dies. That's it. That's literally it. I think what this movie is trying to be is for this generation a movie like Love Story, that Ryan O'Neal film from, I guess, the 70s, which is genuinely very affecting when you watch that. And I think that judging from audience reaction and reviews, this is affecting a lot of people in that way. I found it a really terrible film. There is no emotional growth to these characters, or even emotional tension beyond a small spat at the start when the man asks the woman if she wants kids. The excruciatingly embarrassing and improbable meet cute is trumped by an even more excruciating and improbable birth cute, I guess we're calling it. And worst of all, there's no dramatic tension because the film has a non-linear structure, so the entirety of the film is kind of revealed in the first 5 minutes. I didn't believe that these characters existed in the real world. I didn't care about their love story. I didn't believe in the final tense competition. I just didn't buy any of it. And I think it's a real waste of Florence Pugh because she's a fine actress, and it's not worth your time. But I may well be in the minority of this one. If you agree or disagree with my take on either of these films, please feel free to leave a comment on the blog at Bina007.com or on the YouTube channel. If you want to watch it, We Live in Time is rated R and has a running time of 107 minutes. It played Toronto and London 2024. It was released in the USA on October 11th and will be released in the UK on January 1st, 2025. Thank you for listening.